Working our way through the book of Exodus. Today we come to chapter 20 and the very familiar passage most of us know as the 10 suggestions. Some of you got it, the other like, oh, Bible has suggestions, that's great, okay. Exodus 20, some selected verses. God spoke all these words, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. Honor your father and your mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is going to give you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male or his female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. That all seems like good advice, right? Good suggestions, yeah. Verse 18, when the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain and smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance and said to Moses, speak to us yourself and we will listen, but do not have God speak to us or we will die. Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. God has come to test you so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning. The people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. The 10 suggestions. They're not suggestions, they're commandments. And since we are a room of Bible-believing Christians, and since they're commandments, and since I just read them for you, it should be easy to quickly remember all 10. So here's a little pop quiz. If you would find your worship notes, you'll see there is space 1 through 10 there. You may not open your Bible, you may not use your smartphone, but you can use your neighbor's help. Maybe they know something you don't know. And so we've got a clock we're going to put up. You have 2 minutes to write down all 10. You can abbreviate, you can summarize, but can we get the clock up? And you may go. 2 minutes, write down all 10 commandments. Write them, yeah, write on down 10. It doesn't have to be the right order. I'll give you get extra credit if they're in the right order, but I don't see writing. You should be writing, discussing. A minute and a half left. Should be easy. It's just 10. There's 10 digits in your phone number. 10 is an easy number. You should easily have these. Oh. 60 seconds remaining. Don't panic, just deep breaths. You can do it, you can do it. Some of you are looking very smug. Some of you are looking a little bit horrified. I don't know. If you don't get 100, you have to retake the test, by the way, at the class. We're going to schedule detention for you. 30 seconds almost. If you don't know, just look for the really godly person sitting near you, and they'll help. It's always a good advice. 15 seconds. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Pencils down. And how many got 10? How many got the right 10? Wait a minute, let's try that again. How many have 10? Oh, how many have 9? How many have the right 9? You don't know. Okay, let's try. We'll see. First one. You shall have no other gods before me. Again, you don't have to have the right order. That's just means you're more godly if you do, but it's okay. First one, you shall have no other gods before me. Important because Egypt had many gods and all of the countries surrounding the people of Israel, when they became a nation, there would be lots of gods worship. No, not for Israel. One God. Do not worship other gods. You shall have no other God before me. Number two, you shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on earth beneath or the waters below. What that means is don't make an idol. In all of these other cultures, Egypt where they had come from, to Canaan where they were going, every god was represented by a carved image out of stone, out of metal, out of wood. God's saying, don't worship something you make with your own hands. You will not make, they worship idols, you don't do that. Number three, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Mama always told me, don't take the Lord's name in vain, right? Here's what it means. Not just don't say it improperly, though that's honoring, you shouldn't do that. But the purpose was don't make an oath. Don't call upon the name of God for something that's against his will. Don't misuse it. Number four, you shall, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Now we know the Sabbath day matters. We know God created 6 days, seventh day he rested. But think about the Israelites. For generations, they had been forced to labor 7 days a week. Pharaoh had made no days off, no calling in sick, no holidays. Every day of their life they were called to labor. Now they would have to learn how to find a balance between 6 days of work and 1 day of worship. And learn to trust that with 1 day less productivity, God would still provide. Remember the story about God providing manna on the sixth day, so they'll be provided on the seventh day. Okay, number five, honor your father and your mother. Every parent knew that one, right? You got that. All the moms and dads got that one. But here's what it means. In Egypt, a person's value was linked to their productivity because they were slaves. A person's value was linked to their productivity. There comes a point as we age that we're not able to be as productive. Also, as they wandered for 40 years in the wilderness, it may come a point where mom and dad are having a hard time with the journey. And so there might be the temptation because they're not productive and they're holding us back, slowing us down. Let's just leave them here and go on without them. And you're like, who would do that? That happened in ancient cultures. Not Israel, not acceptable. Number six, you shall not murder. We know that there have been wars all throughout the Bible, but the idea is one person does not have the right to take the life of another person. God gives life, God takes away life. It isn't for me to do or you to do. Number seven, you shall not commit adultery. That means if you're married, you're not allowed to have sex with somebody outside of your marriage. We get that. That tears at the fabric of a marriage. That tears at the sense of intimacy and trust in a relationship. But there was more. In biblical times, inheritance was passed from father to sons in terms of birth order. So we understand adultery affects a marital relationship, a family relationship. But if you think societally, what happens when somebody dies and it's time to get the inheritance, and this guy comes over from this family and says, I think I'm a brother too. Or the brothers say, I don't think you're one of us. You look like the neighbor more than you look like us. Right? I mean, this was it. You heard the expression, good fences make good neighbors. Good fences make good marriages, right? Do not commit adultery. That's really what's going on there. That doesn't mean that there's not good reasons not to commit adultery anyway, but that's kind of what was going on there. Number 8, you shall not steal. They would have to learn, before whatever their labor was Pharaoh's. I work hard, Pharaoh gets it. Now they were going to have to learn that as I work and I'm productive with my life, I will earn, whether it be my crop or my flock or whatever it is. And that I have to trust God for the rest. It's a partnership. I work hard, God blesses. When I steal, I don't trust either. I'm not trusting my hard work, and I'm not trusting God to bless because I'm taking your hard work and God's blessing for you. Thou shalt not steal. Obviously, that tears at society as well. You shall not give false testimony or witness, number 9. What that means is in biblical times, they were going to have to learn how to make agreements, right? If it's going to be an arranged marriage, or I'm going to let you use my land for this farming season, or we're going to trade sheep for goats, or whatever it is. It was not enough ever for just you and me to do it. We would have witnesses come and be part of that. Yes, I heard the arrangement. My witness heard it. Your witness heard it. If there was ever a dispute, witnesses had to tell the truth. You couldn't have your witness lie for your benefit so that I lost. There was going to be fairness, justice. And finally, you shall not covet. You ever notice it's human nature to always want what the other person has? And when I want what they have, that means I don't appreciate what I have. And when I want what they have and resent it, then I'm not valuing that person and thankful for them. I'm just feeling like a victim. When I'm riding my motorcycle by myself, I feel thankful for my motorcycle. When I ride with a group, I notice how much better everybody else's is. That's that human nature. It creates these tensions between us of how much we rather than valuing what I have, I began to objectify you and what you have. 10 commandments or suggestions? Commandments, because all of them are still applicable today for different reasons, but all of them are still applicable today. Now, many say that much of Western society is based on the 10 Commandments, whether you're religious or not, that many of our laws are based, the whole debate about whether monuments of 10 Commandments should be at courthouses. We're not getting into that debate, but that's what it comes from, is that we know that much of our modern society is built upon these simple 10 Commandments. It's a big part of who we are. So here's just a little trivia you may not know about. So in the year 1886, a gift was given to our country from the people of France. Anybody know what that gift was? Statue of Liberty, that's right. Following the abolition of slavery in our country and in France, following the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, there was a movement in France to give this gift to us. And it's up there in New York, a great statue holding up a lamp, which is a symbol of, come to us. Here's the way to a place where you will be welcomed. But there's some symbols in this big symbol. She's designed to be sort of like a Roman goddess. But there's some important symbols that you may not know about. Anybody know what's down at her feet? Look, broken chains. Broken chains, to symbolize, even if you have been someone else's slave, you won't be here. In this country, every person will be treated with freedom. That was the message. That was France and America celebrating that in the future we will be places of freedom. Now, interesting, if you look back at some of the early design drawings of the Statue of Liberty, not only were there broken chains at her feet, but one hand holds up the torch, the other hand, she was supposed to hold broken chains. Another image was they were going to put a broken pot, like a water jug, in her hand. Again, saying, you're not a slave anymore. We're not slaves in this country. But they didn't put a jug or chains in her hand. The chains are at her feet. That symbolizes one thing. What's in her arm? A tablet. A tablet. The only thing written on the tablet is the 4th of July, our Declaration of Independence. But the tablet intentionally was meant to represent who, guess what? The 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments. Think about that symbolism. In our country, you will find freedom. No matter where you've been slave before, in this country you'll be free, and we will be guided, governed by laws. And that they go together. That freedom needs laws. That a free people need laws to guide them, right? That's just kind of the way it works. We need that guidance. You think about the roads, like we have lines in our roads, right, that are supposed to guide the way we drive, and lights and stop signs that we don't always, but we need laws to shape us. So think about for a moment the Exodus story. The whole point of the Exodus story was that God had promised that this group of people would be his special chosen people. They were going to gain a land called the Promised Land. There they would live under God's blessing. So the first thing that had to happen in Exodus is the people had to be free because they weren't in the Promised Land. They had to have freedom from slavery in order to receive the promise. But it doesn't end there. For those people to truly be free, they would also need laws. And that's what the Ten Commandments were, is helping these people who had newfound freedom learn what it meant to be God's special people. So it says in Exodus 19, 4 through 6, "You have seen what I did to Egypt," this is God talking to Israel, "and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now," like I set you free, but now, here's the next step. "If you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." They were going to learn now to be God's people. Think about that for a minute. They have been in Egypt for their entire lives and the entire lives of their ancestors, going way, way, way back. All they knew was how to live under the rule of Pharaoh. All they knew was Egyptian culture. And God's intention was not to take them out to create a second Egypt. He brought them out to be a distinctive people, a holy people, different than everyone else in the world. But if they weren't taught a new way of living, what would they do? Revert to old patterns, old habits. What's that expression? You can take the boy out of the city, but you can't take the city out of the boy, or you can take the boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the boy. That's why they've got to be shaped in a new way. Joe Saxton writes this, that their time in the wilderness was a place of transition, the place between slavery and the Promised Land. It was also a place of testing and transformation as hearts of God's people were fully revealed. Listen to this. Wandering in the wilderness exposed the truth that in order to be fully free, the Israelites didn't just need to get out of Egypt. They needed to get Egypt out of them. They needed to get Egypt out of them. And so that's the purpose of the Ten Commandments. It wasn't to, now you're free, let me give you some rules. It was, let me give you some guidelines. They're more than guidelines, they're commands. But let me give you a set of clear instructions to help you be my people. That if you do these things, you're not going to be like anybody else. You're going to be God's people. You're going to be distinctive. Now, if you pay close attention to the Ten Commandments, you'll notice that really they fall into two groups of commandments. There's 10 of them listed together, but really there's two sets. The first 4 all relate to how we relate to God. Think about that. You'll have no other gods before me. You don't worship idols. Do not use the Lord's name improperly. Keep the Sabbath day as a day of worship. That all is how we relate to God. And then 5 through 10 all relate, 6 commandments, how we relate to each other. Honor your father and mother. Don't steal from each other. Don't cheat on each other in your marriages. Don't covet what each other has. Don't lie about each other. It's how we relate to each other, right? That's the whole point of the commandments. It isn't an individual checklist of like, did I keep all 10 commandments today? It's how do we live together as we honor God and as we live together as a distinctive people of God. Now, one day, somebody comes to Jesus in all the Gospels and says, well, what of the commandments is the most important? And if you didn't know what Jesus says, you might think that, well, okay, there's 10. Which one would you rank first? But Jesus didn't answer that way. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. But then he expands that. I mean, he just said, what's the greatest? He expands it. The second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. You see what Jesus did there? He's talking about the 10 commandments. He's saying all of the commandments, the 10, can be summarized as this. 1 through 4, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. 5 through 10, love your neighbor as you love yourself. That's the purpose of the 10 Commandments, is they teach us how to love God properly? By obeying God. How do we love our neighbor properly? By obeying these commandments. In fact, Jesus takes it even further. He says, this is love. I mean, that's the whole point of it. John 14:15. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. Let's talk about that for a minute. I don't think we very often connect love and obedience. Love and obedience. Jesus is really clear. If you love me, you'll obey me. If you love me, you'll obey me. We create this kind of separation that obedience, that's all about law, but really Jesus was all about love and grace. In fact, I hear the Bible talked about that way sometimes. Like the Old Testament's about law, the New Testament's about grace. Guess what, friends? The Bible doesn't say that anywhere. The Bible is one story divided up into books, chapters, and testaments, but it's one story. Is there law in the Old Testament? Of course there is. It's in the New Testament too. Is there love and grace in the Old Testament? Of course there is. In the Ten Commandments and many other places. And it's in the New Testament too. Law and obedience, grace, love, they all go together. They're all related to each other. The Ten Commandments provide the framework for how we put our love in concrete form. This is so important that Dallas Willard says, how to combine faith with obedience is surely the essential task of the church. It's just easy to say, oh yeah, I believe in Jesus. I believe he died for my sin. Yeah, I believe in heaven. Yeah, it's easy. Are you going to obey him? Are you going to do what he's told us to do? An old missionary named E. Stanley Jones said, I actually believe that the Christian way is the way to live, not merely a way to get into heaven. So think about the laws for a minute. Think about your test. How many commandments did you have to know to be able to get into heaven? Did you get a 90%? Did you get 80%? 70%? A C? Will that get you into heaven? Right? Half, 50, it's half, I got half, maybe Jesus will let me in for that. That's not the point. The point of the Ten Commandments is for us. They're those guardrails. There are the laws, the parameters to help us live good, godly lives that God intends for us. But here's the problem. Remember I talked about freedom and law, that we need both? I mean, we all like the idea of freedom, right? But the reality of human life, the reality for most of us, is that given the choice between freedom as God gives it, governed by his laws, and what we think is freedom in the world, that's actually slavery, is we choose slavery. I mean, over in life, in reality, rather than choosing God's freedom, we choose to shackle ourselves according to the values of this world, according to lies of this world. I mean, just think about the Ten Commandments. You shall have no other gods before me. How many of us are shackled to other gods? That's slavery. You shall not worship things that you make with your own hands. How many of us fall into that? We shackle ourselves to them. How many of us are shackled to our work? How could I ever take a whole day off to Sabbath? How many of us enter into bargains, deals, promises that we never even consult God with? Use my name improperly, right? We shackle ourselves. How many of us don't love our neighbors as we do, and yet we give into the influence of culture, the influence of maybe it's our family, society, the media, and we shackle ourselves. We live as slaves. God intends for us to be free. Jesus came to set us free. The point is free from the things that enslave us. I mean, even when we try as hard as we can, Paul writes, all have sinned and what? I mean, that means there's 10 commandments and that most of us aren't very good at keeping all 10. Heck, we're not good at remembering all 10. How do you keep them if you don't remember them? And then Jesus raised the stakes on us. He says, you've heard it said, you shall not murder, but if you hate somebody and haven't forgiven them, you violated that command. You know the command, don't commit adultery. But if you have lust in your heart, you've committed adultery, right? Jesus raised the stakes, and Paul says, none of us can ever do this. So what do we do? I mean, what options do we have if we've been given these commandments and we have been told, Jesus says, if you love me, you're going to obey them, but none of us can do it. None of us consistently can keep them. What can we do? Well, thankfully, we have Jesus, right? I mean, that's the whole point, is that Jesus came to do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. There's a key word in one of the passages I read earlier, that the 10 Commandments God referred to as a covenant. He says, I'll make a covenant with you. You know what the word covenant means? It's an agreement. I'll make an agreement with you, my friends. I will give you these commandments. I will show you how to love. I will give you a promised kind of life. And if you will obey them, I will be your God and you will be my people. That's a covenant. The problem is God is always faithful to the covenant and we are really bad at it. So what do we do? Well, for years it was all about sacrifice. I'm going to talk about that in a couple of weeks. So, if I wasn't able to keep the commandments, then I gave an animal sacrifice. But that doesn't work either. And so because God is faithful, 100% consistently faithful to the covenant, even when we're not, He sent Jesus. And there's this line, the night that Jesus gave Himself up for us, they were having this meal together, and Jesus said, I have eagerly desired to eat this what? Remember that from the Exodus story, the night they gained freedom from slavery? I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you, a meal of freedom, before I suffer. He took bread, He gave thanks and broke it and gave it to them, saying, this is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And after the supper, He took the cup, saying, this cup is the new covenant in my blood. Now hear this. Jesus was really clear. He said, I did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. Right? He didn't come so that we don't have to be so obedient anymore. We don't have to do that stuff anymore. No, He came to show us this is how you live a perfect life. This is how you love God, by obeying His commandments perfectly. And when you fail, I'll be your sacrifice. God still calls us to be a covenant people. God still calls us to know the covenant and obey the covenant. Jesus defines it. This is what the covenant is. Love God, and here's ways you can do it. It's all about loving obedience. That's what Jesus demonstrates for us. And when we fall short, Jesus says, I will be the sacrifice. I mean, that's what we're celebrating here today, is that we haven't been set free from law. We've been given law as a gift. And in addition to that covenant, there's a new one that makes up the difference for us when we fall short. And by the way, we believe there's a grace here that even though I may in my human flesh fall short of obeying the law and keeping God's covenant, that I'm a whole lot more likely to do it with Jesus' help. What is the greatest commandment? Well, actually there's 10. But they can be summarized. Love the Lord your God. You do it by not worshiping other gods. You do it by not worshiping things we make with our hands. You do it by not using God's name improperly, by keeping a Sabbath. Well, what's the other one? Love your neighbor. You do it by the way we interact and honor each other. We do it the way Jesus did it.